They said the land would never belong to her, not the girl who arrived barefoot, bruised and unwanted, not the girl dragged by the hair through a muddy yard while the neighbors pretended not to see. To them, she was nothing more than a servant child, a mouth to feed, a burden taken out of pity, a reminder of a debt her dead parents could never repay. No one imagined that the same girl, beaten, silenced, and worked like an animal, would one day hold the deed to every acre of that farm. And no one imagined the chain of betrayals, secrets, and cold, deliberate choices that would lead her there. Because land, in those days, was not inherited by the gentle. It was claimed by those who survived. And survival always had a price. Before we step into this forgotten corner of rural history, a story of cruelty, cunning, resilience, and the quiet rise of a girl the world tried to break, make sure you subscribe to our channel so you never miss stories that history buried under silence and soil. They said Lisa arrived at the Raskin farm in the spring of 1412, when the river still carried winter's chill and the wheat fields stood pale and brittle. She was no more than 12, thin as a fence post, eyes too large for her face, the kind that made people look away because they revealed more suffering than a child should know. Her parents had died the previous winter. Sickness, they said, though no one bothered to check if it was hunger that finished them first. The Raskins were not cruel by reputation, just practical, hardened by seasons and taxes and the bitter mathematics of running a farm with more debts than livestock. When they took Liza in, the village praised them for their generosity. But generosity in those days often meant something closer to ownership, and Liza learned that quickly. She slept beside the goats, ate what was left on the plates, woke before the sun touched the thatched roof. If she slowed, she was struck. If she cried, she was mocked for wasting water. But she obeyed, because obedience was safer than the alternative, and because she knew she had nowhere else to go. The farmer's wife, Marta Raskin, was the sort of woman who measured her worth by the weight of her authority. She ruled the household with a broom in one hand and a ledger in the other. The locals said she worked harder than her husband, but they also said she punished harder than he ever dared. It was she who dragged Liza by the hair through the yard that first month, the neighbors watching through shutters, pretending they had eggs to gather and wood to chop. The girl's crime, dropping a clay bowl, the punishment, humiliation. Lisa never forgot the feel of gravel cutting her knees or the sound of Marta's voice, cold, dismissive, convinced of her own righteousness. In that moment, the child understood something that would stay with her for years. Power didn't come from fairness. It came from being needed or being feared, and she was neither. Life on the farm settled into a brutal rhythm. Seasons passed. Lisa learned to work silently, her hands calloused, her back strong. She learned which fields flooded first, which cows pretended to be gentle before kicking, which tools the farmer sharpened himself because he trusted no one else. By 14, she could repair a fence faster than the hired men. By 16, she could predict a storm by the smell of the wind. The villagers noticed, but they also noticed something else. Marta grew harsher the more useful the girl became. Some said jealousy, some said control, others said the woman feared what she could not dominate fully. Whatever the reason, Lisa learned to hide her thoughts, her skills, her ambitions, especially her ambitions, because in a place where land defined a person's entire value, even the suggestion of dreaming beyond your place could get you beaten or worse. Yet it was not Marta who became the greatest danger. It was the farmer himself. Joran Raskin was a man ground down by responsibility, a man who once had dreams of expanding his land, but had watched taxes, droughts, and royal levies strip his life down to the bone. He was kinder than his wife in small ways. A warmer meal, a pair of wool stockings in winter, a word of praise spoken quietly when Marta wasn't near enough to hear. But kindness is a currency in struggling households, and every coin spent demands repayment. Joran began seeking Liza out more often, in the barn, in the fields, at the well. His tone softened, his questions lingered too long, and Liza, though young, was not naive. She sensed a shift, a dangerous one. In 1417, everything changed when Marta fell ill. It began with headaches, then vomiting, then long nights spent shivering by the fire. The village healer shrugged. Bad food, bad fortune, nothing to be done. But the whispers began almost immediately. Some said Marta had pushed herself too hard. Some said it was punishment for her treatment of the girl. And some, the most dangerous, wondered aloud whether the sickness came from a more human hand. Liza kept to her chores, silent as always, but the rumors clung to her like shadows, especially after Marta's condition worsened, especially after Joran began spending more nights in the barn, checking the animals, especially after neighbors noticed that Lisa, not Marta, had begun managing the household accounts with startling precision. Then came the night Marta collapsed beside the hearth, her skin the color of wet ash. Joran carried her to the bed, shouting for help, his voice high with panic. But it was too late. The farmer's wife died before dawn, the neighbors watching from doorways with crossed arms and narrowed eyes. At sunrise, the healer declared it illness of the humors. By mid-morning, the village was whispering a different phrase. Someone helped her along, and when they spoke of suspects, when they looked for motive, opportunity, and strange new changes within the household, their eyes didn't turn to Joran. They turned to the girl he once dragged across the yard. They turned to Lisa. But what they didn't know, what no one yet suspected, was that Marta's death was not the most shocking thing that would happen on that farm. Something far worse was coming. The weeks after Marta's death became a study in uneasy silence. The villagers avoided the Raskin farm, except when business forced them to cross its creaking gates. They left offerings of bread or broth on the stoop, instead of stepping inside, muttering quick blessings, as if the air itself carried suspicion. But Lisa felt something heavier than rumors moving through the house, a shifting of weight, of expectations, of unspoken obligations that had been tightening around her for years. Joran became strangely gentle, too gentle. He asked Liza to sit at the table instead of standing in the corner. He offered her Marta's old shawl for the cold mornings and insisted she no longer sleep in the goat shed. He looked at her with the fragile, yearning gratitude of a man who believed he had been given a second chance at life, or at least companionship. And Lisa, though wary, understood exactly what that meant. A man who loses a wife suddenly often clings to the nearest source of comfort, even if that source never asked for the burden. But Joran's change brought something else. Control, softly spoken, almost affectionate control, but control nonetheless. He forbade her from going into the village alone. He asked her to tell him where she worked each hour of the day. He asked her to sit with him in the evenings, sometimes talking, sometimes simply listening, as he rambled about the farm's debts, the weather, the future. At first, She thought it was grief, but grief does not watch a person the way Joran watched her. Grief does not close doors quietly behind them. Grief does not ask a 17-year-old girl if she feels safe sleeping so far from the house. Lisa began sleeping with a wooden rake wedged beneath her bed. She kept her work near the open fields where she could see who approached. And though she never said it aloud, she understood a truth that frightened her more than anything Marta had ever done. She was no longer a powerless servant. She had become something more valuable and more vulnerable. After Marta's burial, Joran tried to make the change look respectable in the eyes of the village. He brought Lisa with him to the market, not walking ahead of her like before, but beside her, as though the distance between them had closed naturally. He introduced her to the magistrate as the girl who keeps my household standing. He told merchants she had a good mind for accounts. Villagers began exchanging glances after every introduction, as if they were witnesses to a play whose ending they already predicted. Still, they held their tongues. They remembered the bowl-breaking child dragged across the yard. They wondered how she had risen so gently into the farmer's favor, too gently, and rumors, once planted, grow like weeds. By the winter of 1418, a new whisper took root, that Marta's death had been no accident, that the Raskin farm was shifting in ways that felt unnatural, that perhaps the girl, now nearly grown, had planned something all along. Lisa tried to ignore it, but the rumor followed her. Even the healer's apprentice avoided her eyes when she bought herbs. The miller's wife crossed herself when Lisa walked by. It wasn't hatred, it was fear. Fear of a girl too quiet, too capable, too suddenly necessary to a man who had never shown tenderness before. But Lisa kept her thoughts close. She worked, she endured, and she waited. Then, one night in the dead of December, Joran took her aside. The fire was low, the house cold, the world silent except for the muffled howl of wind slamming against the shutters. He stood near her, close enough that she felt the heat of his breath on her cheek. His voice was soft, trembling, rehearsed. He told her he intended to name her heir to the farm. The words struck her like a blow, not out of joy, out of terror. An unmarried farmer naming a young woman, unrelated by blood, as heir was unheard of. The villagers would talk, the magistrate would question it. His relatives, distant, scattered but still living, would challenge the claim. And worst of all, it tied her fate to Joran completely. If she accepted, she would never escape him. If she refused, he would view her refusal as betrayal. But he wasn't finished. He stepped closer, lowering his voice even further, as though confessing a secret. He said he had grown fond of her, that he believed fate had brought them together, that Marta's death had made room for something new, something meant to be. Lisa felt the world tighten around her throat. She realized with cold clarity that he did not intend to merely name her heir. He intended to make her something else, something she had never consented to be. In that moment, survival became a calculation. She thought of Marta's face the night she died. She thought of the villagers' suspicion. She thought of Joran's increasing possessiveness. She thought of the land, the acres she knew better than any map, and of what this farm did to anyone who lacked power, and she made a choice. The next morning, Joran Raskin was found in the lower field, lying face down in the frozen soil. Some said it was the cold. Some said it was his heart. Some said the winter had claimed him the way it claimed many men his age. But the villagers whispered louder this time, because Lisa found him first, because she cried too quietly, because no one believed fate would take both Marta and Joran so neatly. The magistrate ruled it death by natural causes. The village shook its head, and Lisa, with no surviving kin to challenge the will Joran had drafted the night before, became the legal heir to the Raskin farm. The child, once dragged across the yard, had inherited every acre of the land that tried to break her. And though no one dared accuse her openly, everyone shared the same lingering, chilling thought. If she truly had orchestrated everything, what else was she capable of orchestrating next? History remembers the powerful, but it is often built on the silent endurance of those no one believed in. Sometimes survival is not heroic. It is simply the refusal to be broken. If you want more forgotten stories, buried truths, and untold lives shaped by struggle and resilience, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss our next story.